Hello out there everyone and welcome to my channel, The Reconverted Catholic. I'm Chris Vitale, also known by my nickname CV, Catholic apologist and lifelong theology student. Now in my apologetics and evangelization work, I often see or hear the claim from other Christian denominations that you Catholics worship statues or worship idols. Or even in a question form, why do you Catholics worship statues or worship idols? Now, the simple answer is that's not true at all. In fact, this claim has been thoroughly debunked in many forms and wonderful books out there, many other Catholic channels out on social media, on YouTube, etc., and everything in between, every other medium in between. In fact, this issue has been thoroughly debunked for about 1,300 years now. How and why? Well, stay tuned to find out. Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and dive into the topic for this video. This is the second video in my series called Church History Bits. Well, in this video I'll be covering what's called the Iconoclast controversy and how this ties into objection we Catholic Christians hear often in modern day that well, we worship statues and idols. Well, as you will learn here, this claim about Catholics worshiping statues and idols, well, it's been long debunked, and in fact, it was a challenge within the Catholic Church itself, going back now about 1,300 years. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, when looking at the numerous disputes that the early Catholic Church had with splinter movements, and sometimes within its own hierarchy, by splinter movements, I'm referring to what are now known as heresies. Early church, we had the Marcion, Pelagian, Novatian, Arian, Donatist heresies, just to name a few, and schisms, or there were either potential schisms or schisms that then eventually were, well, debunked. Well, anyhow, it's almost uncanny that many of the disputes today among Christians and skeptics mirror situations now hundreds of centuries old. Some examples. You'll hear a present-day skeptic say, well, the God of the Old Testament is a tyrant. He can't be the same God as the God of the New Testament. And present-day Christian theologian, apologist, will answer, well, yep, Marcion had the same issue about 1,900 years ago, but then the matter was eventually resolved. Skeptic may then say, well, the Trinity is confusing. Is Jesus the same as God the Father? Has he always existed, or was he begotten during creation? How do we know the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, and not through the Father and the Son? Well, theologian today would say, well, yep, Catholics and the Arians, well, it's now known as the Arian heresy, argued over this about 1,700 years ago, but then the matter was resolved. Another question, well, what about Jesus' nature? Is he fully human and fully God? Or is he human with a divine calling? Or is he divine only in the spiritual sense, but not in the bodily sense? Was Jesus capable of sinning because he was a man? Well, there again, today, ask a theologian or apologist, and well, the Antiochians and the Alexandrians well, argued over this very topic about 1,500 to around 1,600 years ago, but then the matter was resolved. And now, and what relates to the topic of this video, well, what about worshiping statues and other things that look like idols? Here again, the East and West Catholic churches argued over this about 1,300 years ago, but then the matter was resolved. And let's see how. Now, first, not to say that there's no need to pursue answers to big theological questions or consider any new developments, but at what point should an issue be put to rest? When does a debate get so maxed out that all that is left is the same argument continually regurgitated or redressed into a new argument that is actually an ancient one? Plato or Aristotle probably would have produced a wonderfully abstract answer, looking at it from the philosophical sense. But in the meantime, examining the iconoclast controversy may at least explain the circumstances around this debate and what can be learned from how the debate was resolved. This begins with the political and religious conflicts in the 8th century. As Islam had spread throughout much of the East and West, in parts of the world, and this is around the Mediterranean, going far west into Europe, and also far east into Mediterranean and into Asia, parts of Asia. So large swath of territory. The Catholic Church was essentially double whammied by the threat of an invading religion and yet another theological debate, creating further division between Eastern and Western churches. Now, this theological tug of war was started by then Emperor Leo, and then perpetuated throughout the Western churches. Boiled down to whether icons or images should be used for devotional or reverential purposes. Over in the East, icons were a staple in devotional life. They helped believers reflect on the greater spiritual truths they upheld. And actually, fast forward today, you see a lot of imagery, and well, not only you see some in Western, or actually Latin Rite Catholic churches, but also the Eastern Rite Catholic churches. There are 22 total, and then in Eastern Orthodox, heavy in icons and imagery, and very beautiful, by the way. Anyhow, having migrated from East to West, Leo was familiar, that is, Emperor Leo was familiar with Eastern practices. So he had moved from east part of the world to West, and again was of course very comfortable with Eastern practices. Still, he was not a fan. So much so, he helped build a following of what he called iconoclasts, who spent the next several decades persecuting iconodule nuns and monks and deploying troops to destroy icons and images wherever necessary. Leo's reason was pretty straightforward, and yet another mirror to debates in modern times. The 10 Commandments forbid worshiping idols, which we often hear from our Christians from other denominations. Well, now over in the East, the Patriarch of Constantinople, so he shared some authority with then the Bishop of Rome, known as the Pope, he naturally opposed this view, to which Leo then threw him out of office and found a replacement who aligned with the iconoclast view. Constantine, Leo's son, continued the legacy until, sort of ironically, the next Leo, so there was another Emperor Leo, Constantine's son, married Irene, an Athenian woman who was, well, an iconodule, and apparently made no bones about it. In fact, when Leo passed in the year 780, Irene started a campaign to terminate the iconoclast iconodule feud. This led to what's called the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. With representatives from the Eastern and Western churches, they had multiple meetings from September through October that year, with the fourth session on October 5th directly and somewhat suspensefully addressing the issue at hand. Namely, while it appeared that the council was still leaning toward prohibiting icons, the ruling ended up in favor of restoring icons and images. But as it happens in life sometime, not everyone in the church was on board with the ruling. And for the next several more decades, iconoclasts continued to persecute iconodules, which caused a one step forward, two steps back situation for the iconodules. Iconoclasts, still clinging to the Old Testament, drew parallels between iconodules and Israelites repeatedly breaking covenant and instead worshiping idols. So that was their argument for this, of course, right? And again, referring to the Old Testament. Yet, like the Leo and Irene story, Empress Theodora put an end to the persecution after Theophilus' death in the 9th century. Now, though the issue was finally put to rest, an overarching theological point was still at play, as the church still considered Christ as having two natures, fully God and fully man. This meant re-examining how Christology, and Christology meaning that, well, Christ's nature, what Christ means, what Christ represents, and who he was as in his nature, as we understand as Christians, fully God and fully man. Well, this re-examining how Christology fit with creation, also having two natures. Well, I'm sorry. This meant re-examining how Christology fit with creation, also having two natures, the material and the spiritual. Now, John of Damascus, who wrote extensively on this topic about 20 years before the Second Council of Nicaea, argued that the term nature was limited to Jesus' human nature or body. That said, and just as Theodosius II had helped settle the two-nature matter at the Council of Chalcedon, another Chalcedon, another council that had occurred, and again held by Theodosius II, John of Damascus applied this understanding as an all-encompassing two levels of reality, the material and the divine. In short, just as the liturgy has material elements to represent the divine, and I'm talking about the Mass, the Catholic Mass, and the elements of the Catholic Mass, this applies across the board to all of creation. So it leads back to opening, a question here, or even the claim, right? The opening claim that we hear from other Christians now in modern day. If we think about it, if this issue was thoroughly vetted, and if the outcome was based on reasoning, having a debate, and understanding what really is the nature of having images, what that means, okay, and that material representation of God, okay, if it's a cross, representation of Christ, image of Christ, right? It's not that the crucifix itself. I'm not saying that that is Christ right there, literally on the crucifix, or if there's imagery, for example, an image of Christ, a painting of Christ, or even of Blessed Mother Mary, or we have statues, for example, and honor. Actually, it's to revere. For example, for Christ or Blessed Mother Mary or the saints. So all this is to say that none of this involves worship, though. Too, it's just simply first, it's reverence. So there's a difference between reverence and worship, and that needs to be made clear. That distinction needs to be made clear. So we revere, of course, revere the saints. We revere Mary. We don't worship Mary. We don't pray. We don't worship saints. We pray for intercession. That's a video for another time, talking about intercession, how that works, and that versus worship. But it ties into this topic as well about icons and images, because again, here within the Catholic faith, we see images as the material representation. Like we have in nature, we have all kinds of means, like through art. If you think about art and music, ways to express something in a symbolic way, right, or in a metaphorical way, express a greater truth, right, a greater understanding, okay? So images within the Catholic Christian faith help show that. They're reminders of that greater truth, of that greater understanding. And then we show reverence, right, because we connect with these signs of, or these representations of how we understand our relationship with God and God's grace. Not to be confused, of course, with sacraments, so we know as being visible signs of God's grace. But the icons and imagery that we see again in churches, Catholic churches, they're not there just for decoration, or in the sense of just, of course, make the churches look in more of a place of, to show reverence and to, of course, participate in worship and liturgy. But again, to serve as the visible reminders that of the gospel message of Christ's sacrifice, his death and resurrection for our salvation. And that's really it. It's just about respecting images that we see, or having ways to connect, to make a picture in our head of our understanding of our relationship with God, and nothing more. I hope this video was useful. As always, feel free to ask questions. Please leave comments. I imagine there may be some this particular topic, or if there's any pushback on well, no, Chris, actually, you know, you do in fact worship statues or what. I've seen that. I've received some pushback, and you're welcome to show me any evidence or, you know, to support your claim. We can certainly discuss through your points, your comments. I'm happy to again receive feedback. You're also welcome to email me at trcatholic@gmail.com. Please remember to like and you know, like this video and subscribe to the channel. And until the next video, please stay safe out there, and God bless.